Hi, this lecture is on Chapter 12, where we're working with symbols. And a symbol is simply a person, place, or thing in a narrative or in a poem that suggests meanings beyond its literal sense. If you read through the chapter, you saw the authors also reference toward the back of the chapter that the poet John Drury calls the symbol an image that radiates meaning. So we know it suggests meanings beyond its literal sense. It radiates meanings, and much in the way an allusion to something outside of the poem can add depth and meaning in very few words, a symbol can also add meaning in very few words. We recognize that this image is referring to something beyond its literal meaning, and so it adds to the density, it adds to the additional meaning and depth in the poem, but with very few words. Symbols can show up in different ways. You might find in a literary work that there's a particular action that happens and that its significance goes well beyond its literal meaning, so that would be a symbolic act. If you have a narrative where there are several symbols that they symbolize abstractions, ideas, or values, so they give the narrative two meanings, then you have an allegory. You have a story that has its literal narrative, and then you also have the symbolic level where those abstractions unfold. And finally, we have conventional symbols. And these are symbols that have been used so often that they have a kind of set or standard or accepted significance. And you might remember the poem by Robert Burns, Oh, My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose. So poems like that over time and other literary references to roses have given us the conventional symbol of the rose as a symbol of love. The poem I want to look at to better understand how symbols function in poetry is Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Let's start, as we always do, by just looking at what the poem actually says. So here the speaker tells us, we don't have to be good. We don't have to repent. These are constructs that we've created, and they cause us suffering. But we don't have to suffer in that way. We only have to let the soft animal of our bodies love what they love. In other words, accept our place in the natural world, the animal aspect of our beings, and move away from focusing on being good or repenting and suffering. And the speaker goes on to acknowledge that we all experience despair. Largely, it's implied, because we don't let the soft animal of our bodies love what they love, and we continue to suffer. And while we're suffering, the natural world itself just keeps going. And she gives us some imagery of the sun and the rain moving across the natural landscapes, the prairies, the forests, the mountains, the rivers. And then we get the image of the wild geese that are flying high in the clean blue air. And here comes Mary Oliver, the wisdom poet, letting us know that no matter our situation, no matter how lonely we are, the natural world is there. It's calling to our imagination, and this simile calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting. And that call from the world is continually announcing to us our place in the family of things. In other words, if we can move away from our human constructs here and hear the call from the world that's always there saying we are part of that natural world family, we might be able to relieve ourselves of the despair we experience. The wild geese are the symbol in this poem. They're here in the title. They show up here in the image of flying high in the clean blue air, heading home. And then they occur again in the simile. The world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese. So let's look at that symbol and think about what additional meaning it brings to the poem. The geese symbolize the natural world. They're wild. That tells us that they're not domesticated. They're living as intended and not as human beings have constructed. They're also flying, which suggests a kind of freedom, a freedom of movement. And we find that their call is harsh and exciting, perhaps the way that freedom feels to experience. We also know that they're heading home again. And so here they symbolize how we too, if we recognize and accept our place in the family of things, could have that freedom, could be free from the despair that we experience. I've included on Moodle a recording of Mary Oliver reading this poem. And I've also included some other resources. It's a shorter chapter, but some of the poems are quite dense and also very good examples of symbolism in poetry. And so you'll see on Moodle that there are resources for Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, and also for Wallace Stevens' poem, The Snowman. And I encourage you to look at those resources and think more about how symbols function in those poems and the other poems in the chapter.